Hello everyone and welcome to the hashtag We Are Gaucher digital conference. Today on International Gaucher Day 2020, we digitally come together, patients, physicians, advocates and communicate members from around the world to transform healthcare for Gaucher disease. Throughout the event, we will be joined by leading experts as they share the latest insights into diagnostics, treatments and future technologies that could change the game for Gaucher patients. We will also hear from patient advocacy groups and take a look inside what Gaucher really means from patients firsthand. As a former medical doctor and clinician and now CEO of CENTOGENE, but still seeing a lot of patients all over the globe, I have been actively involved in the identification of plenty of problems Gaucher patients are faced with, and in turn develop life-changing medical solutions. You see, just like some of you, there was a period in my life as medical doctor where I was not aware about Gaucher disease. I had never even come across it in any of the extensive literature I had read. That is until what I like to refer to as a moment of fate, and one that I think about quite often. It was a great day with my family at the beach, and I was scouring through a weekly popular newspaper called The Times. There was an article about Gaucher disease. I was intrigued by the paper and the fact that I had never come across this disease and likely never would in real life. So I went about my day. The next day, it was a Monday, a patient was presented to me by the young doctors suffering from unclear epilepsy, but severe epilepsy. During the conversation, I learned that he was also suffering from hepatomegaly, bone pain, and thrombocytopenia. At that time, having seen plenty of specialists, no expert was able to come for that patient to the right diagnosis. Only because of the popular newspaper I had previously stumbled across, I could help him. At that time, no one, however, in Germany was offering the lab tests for the suspected Gaucher disease, so we had to think about how to get Gaucher enzyme and the Gaucher gene analyzed. We established quickly all tests in my laboratory, and based on this, we were coming very soon to the final diagnosis, Gaucher disease. I often think about the happenings of that event and more importantly about that patient. What would have happened if I wouldn't have been able to detect that he was in fact living with Gaucher disease after having seen dozens of experts? Gaucher affects 1 in 40,000 people. As you can imagine, this rarity creates challenges for doctors and for patients, often requiring several years to receive a final diagnosis, going from physician to search for the right test and feeling alone and unhappy. This is unacceptable because honestly, Gaucher is not that rare at all. Currently, there are 10,000 of Gaucher patients located across the globe. Alongside them are their family members, friends, physicians, advocates, and companies around the world like CENTOGENE that are here to support them. Gaucher is not simply a disease. Gaucher is a patient. Gaucher is a physician. Gaucher is a parent. Gaucher is a community, and together we are Gaucher. As we go about this conference, I ask you to remember that. To remember that there are Gaucher patients, real people, individuals, who have a voice that needs to be heard and a cause that needs to be known. Let me be clear. It is our social responsibility to play an active role in making that happen. So with that, I once again say thank you for joining us for IGD 2020 and hand it over to my colleague JORDI to kick off the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, and welcome everyone to We Are Gaucher Digital Conference. My name is JORDI PÉREZ, responsible of Patient Advice and Liaison Service in CENTOGENE, and I will be the moderator of this panel discussion. I'm very excited to participate in this event because part of my activity is related with providing free of charge molecular analysis for the diagnosis of Gaucher disease in developing countries, and with the development of my LSD application for monitoring the quality of life of patients with Gaucher disease. As mentioned in the introduction, the 1st of October is an important day of the year and truly an opportunity to shine a spotlight for the Gaucher community. As part of our activities today, we have invited leaders from around the world to join our panel, discussing the latest approaches to working together to improve healthcare for Gaucher. Among us today, we welcome AVIVA Rosenberg, co-founder and co-president of the Gaucher Community Alliance, TANYA Collins-HISTED, Chief Executive Officer of the International Gaucher Alliance, Dr. Ari ZIMRAN, Head of the Gaucher Unit at Shoshana Rebel-Wilk, and founder and former director of the Gaucher Unit at the Shaare Zedek Medical Center in Jerusalem, and Dr. CHEEMA, head of the Pediatric Gastroenterology Department at the Children's Hospital of Lahore. We are certain that this discussion between prominent specialists and advocates in the field will truly open up the conversation, raise awareness, and drive solutions. So let's begin. We are talking about, in this panel discussion, about the patient specialist engagement for the improving of healthcare of Gaucher disease patients. And we are talking about the following topics. One of them will be the engagement of drug discovery research. Another is the engagement in clinical management guidelines and its adaptation to the real needs of patients, and about the engagement in order to increase the awareness of Gaucher disease. Okay, so let's start with the first topic. You know, the rare diseases, by definition, affects a very small number of patients, and it's totally with the dispersion of in the geography, and they are disconnected globally, and it makes difficult, and it affects in many different things, like, for example, define the genetic origin of the disease, understand the natural history, define biomarkers, or even to recruit patients to organize different studies, like, for example, registries, natural histories studies, or clinical trials. Okay, and on the other hand, there is concern about the pharmaceuticals industries regarding the risky situation of invest in this group of diseases. So the first question could be, how is the role of patient organizations and advocacy groups, for example, in this drug discovery research? How it could be the collaboration? Let's start, for example, if you want, with AVIVA, for example.
Thank you, Jordi. So I see the role of the patient organization with the clinical trial sort of twofold. On one hand, the patient organization, it really starts pre-trial. So, you know, in pre-trial design, we really encourage pharmaceuticals and biotech companies to work with the patient organizations and work with patients in designing a trial that is most, you know, patient-friendly and appropriate, and really thinking about a lot of the ethical issues that the families are, you know, going through when they decide whether or not to participate in a trial or in research. So we want to really start the process before we get to that trial, just in terms of talking and really designing something that's patient-centric, and in knowing that, you know, research is often unknown. The second role of the patient organizations that we see is really with assistance with recruitment. If you're, you know, for us in North America, it's a very wide expanse of land. So if you're fortunate enough to have your treatment at an academic center in an urban area, then you may be up to date on the latest developments. but there's both, many patients are being seen in their local towns with local physicians, and they often have, they're not up to date on what research is available and the latest trial options, the latest discoveries. And so that's really where the patient organizations can disseminate information to our communities and allow all patients to sort of educate themselves and hear what's going on, and again, make decisions for their families as appropriate, whether or not they want to travel to an academic center and participate in such research. So sort of I see it as twofold.
Good. Tanya, Colin, for example, do you think that how is the role the advocacy groups, for example, in case to let's say to promote the creation of programs, for example, with to reduce the cost of pharmaceuticals industry? How could be, or the patient organizations or advocacy groups in this field?
So thank you, Jordi. I was gonna add to what AVIVA has said, is that I think it's really important to get the patient organizations involved at the very, very early preclinical stage, particularly in terms of educating companies about the disease. Nobody knows better than the patients and the caregivers about the burden of the disease, to really understand the symptoms of the disease, and to educate the company on the disease. It's only then that you can really find out what it is that patients want from a drug. What is it that they want? What symptoms do the patients want to be addressed by that drug? So, going on what AVIVA said, really at the very, very early stages of any drug development, I think that patient advocates should be really involved. And I think as well as that, by understanding the patients and the burden of the disease, is then the patient organizations having an input into the endpoints, having really robust endpoints for clinical trials that really have a meaning for those patients. And that could be, yes, it's very important to have clinical biomarkers, etc. But also, what would the drug improve in somebody's life? Could it improve their independence, their ability to work? How do you measure that? And really start to think about those at the very, very early stage of the clinical trial design, so you're actually asking the right questions, you're getting the right data, so that when you present it to the regulators. As patient advocates, that's something that either we as patient advocates can support, or we can get access to patients and their caregivers and run focus groups, so that you can get all of that information.
Okay, how about the opinion of the doctors? How is the role exactly of the experts, the community of doctors? In Gaucher, for example, you want to start, for example, Professor CHEEMA?
Yeah, well, in a country like Pakistan, I think we started this with the patient organization. That came before. There wasn't a registered patient organization, but we had lead parents who were struggling in, before 2013, and trying to reach out, because there was no organized system. There was no center for looking after the patients of Gaucher. So it's actually the parents who were reaching out, and initially it's the parents who reached out to me as well, and then linked me up with Tanya and other people, other experts, because we were like, before 2013, we didn't have a cohesive kind of a approach, and there was no, the center that we started at Children's Hospital did not exist in 2010, I would say. So the patient organization also is very important for us, and just what AVIVA said, even in USA, if that is applicable. It was interesting to hear that, because in Pakistan, in the remote areas, like the patient, which I was discussing with Tanya before the meeting, lives in a remote area of another province. It's the patient society which linked them up with us, because they approached the patient society, and through them we got linked up with them, and then they started we started getting involved with the treatment. So the remote areas, and also again linking up with if, for instance, the prenatals and the information about genetic diseases, whenever we print it out and the patients are coming in, when they're sitting outside, the parent leaders actually disseminate, as Tanya rightly said. In Pakistan, that's even more important. And if it's important in USA, where I thought there will be so many, in my imagination, this exists in Pakistan, that we don't have a lot of urban centers. But patients who cannot approach us, many times the local community, when they reach out, and now, for instance, on the belt near Afghanistan, we have about 4 patients. For 2 of them, we arranged the doctors to give them treat because they can't come to our center regularly. For the other 2, it was the same. It was these parents of the other 2 who actually got it in a very tedious way arranged to get a physician to give treatment and to tell him, get our guidelines across to him, because he wasn't available even on the WhatsApp to us. So it was very fortunate that those 2 parents actually helped us out. So patient organizations and the parents' input is enormous. We tried the second approach of pressurizing the government from the patient society to get treatment, and that didn't work. I thought that would be an enormous role because we got them together and said, go bug the government about your children, they're not getting treatment. But that we were not successful. And maybe in the future, we might get success on that. And again, explaining, if there is if you look at quality of life parameters, the way we talk about them, or the way when I sit with the parents and they talk about it, is different. Because to us it's like, okay, the liver's going down, the spleen's going down, the platelets are better, and all's going good. But they might have, and then they discuss it with each other. So we have formed a group even on the WhatsApp, and they put in, because we can't check it all the time. But then the leaders of the parents group, they will reach out to us and say, the lymph nodes in the abdomen of that particular child's ultrasound are getting worse. Could you see this? It's a huge impact, because for countries like Pakistan, where the centers are less, where human resource of specialists looking after them is less, where we are all busy in a very odd way, we work in odd hours in developing countries, these patient organizations reaching out to physicians is the most important thing for us. They are pivotal for us.
Okay, very good. So, Professor ZIMRAN, you have a lot of experience with clinical trials with patients. So what is your experience? What is your pitfalls, difficulties that you find? So it's very interesting, your opinion as well.
Well, thank you, Jordi, and nice to see everyone. So the role of patient advocacy group is very important all over the world. I mean, the situation in Pakistan may be very different than the one in the United States. Nevertheless, whenever we talk about a rare disease, and Gaucher is a very typical example, you cannot do it alone. I mean, the government will not be highly motivated. Pharmacy is motivated, but I'll come back to it. And even the local doctors, the general practitioners, and even the specialists in the community are very often, as we all know, and you will show us later, are not thinking about the rare disease at the top of their mind, even though if they can attend as many meetings as they like, but still they will tend to forget about it when they see the patient. So we have actually received a lot of help from the patient organization. In Israel, it was in the early 90s in order to fight for the reimbursement of treatment when it became available, because of the high cost, of course. And because the disease is rare, you need to campaign and to go to whether it's for the media or whether it's to local court and make the claim. You would not have been able to bring it to the situation of today, where all the patient in Israel are sponsored by the government, and the patient organization in Israel itself had a very major role. A decade later, we received help from the UK Gaucher Association originally, and with what has become the European patient advocacy. When at the beginning there was one treatment, and when new therapeutic modalities or a new enzyme came, we had the problem of identifying naive patients who were severe enough to be able to demonstrate that the new enzyme that has been brought for clinical trial will have a patient at the same disease severity as those that were originally studied in the late 80s and early 90s. For example, when it was a company by the name of TKT, which today is Takeda, and there was the Israeli company as well. When in 2004, they introduced a new enzyme, most of the patients in countries like Western Europe and the United States and in Israel were actually treated. We didn't have those patients with massive organomegaly, as Roscoe Brady studied earlier. And we had an opportunity to provide enzyme therapy in countries where treatment was not reimbursed. And I'm talking about, at that time, Eastern Europe, what you call Central Europe. So we got networked to the patients in Romania and Bulgaria and Serbia through the support of the patient organization, which today would be the IGA. So we were introduced to the patients through the patient groups, and later on, the same organization helped other patients who were not selected to be part of the clinical trial to receive treatment. Again, we jump another decade, and we are now thinking about finding still naive patients for innovative therapies that are using still different modalities, whether it's an SRT, whether it's a pharmacological chaperone, and more recently, even more heroic gene therapy studies. Finding naive patients that, on the one hand, will be suitable for the trial, at the same time will not be abused, because you want patients that really need the treatment. We are relying again on the help of the patient organization and their own network, which is much broader than any network of even big centers that exist today. And this must be in two levels. One level is identify the patient. The second level, again, and this is why, as you heard from Tanya and AVIVA, the patient organizations, the leader of the organizations, must be involved in the details of every new therapeutic modality that is being developed, in order to, on the one hand, find a patient that is suitable for the trial, and finding a suitable patient is critical for the success of the drug development. But on the other hand, they should work like watchdog to prevent that the patient will not be abused. For example, if in India or Pakistan, there is a lack of treatment for so many patients, you still don't want these patients to be subject to a clinical trial that may be too risky. So the risk-benefit consideration that exists in every drug development and every medical decision may at some times be threatened by highly motivated companies to bring a therapeutic modality that is not trivial. So I would say the most exotic example today are gene therapy trial, and we have a couple of companies developing gene therapy, and gene therapy is very important. If it's successful, it could be a one-time solution to patients who otherwise need to be dependent on lifetime administration of intravenous therapy, or a daily administration of small molecules that may be associated with different types of adverse effect. But at the same time, you really need to be sure that the gene therapy process by itself it can be very risky. Let's take a company that is using ex vivo gene therapy with lentivirus. So you need to take a stem cell from the patient, send them to the lab, transfect them with the virus. The virus contains, of course, the human gene that will produce inside our body the right enzyme. But then in order when you return it and it targets the macrophage beautifully, that's what we want to do in, for example, type 1 Gaucher disease. But in order to allow these engineered cells to populate nicely in the marrow, you need to suppress the marrow through a conditioning stage. So you give chemotherapy to the patient, and the chemotherapy by itself is life-threatening. So you don't want to take a patient with mild disease. The company would love to have a patient mildly affected, because the patient mildly affected is more likely to tolerate the treatment. But at the same time, there is a major issue of risk-benefit. Now, when the patients are involved and engaged with the study design from the beginning, they would not vote, they would not be able to support a procedure where the risk is so high compared to the benefit, because maybe you can fight for compassionate therapy. At the same time, you want a better therapy, but you then need to get a patient whose disease sickness justify the added risk. So these are examples that we are experiencing today. In these very days, there are actually several companies developing innovative treatments, whether are gene therapy I already mentioned. I gave example from ex vivo. There is also direct injection in vivo gene therapy, where you don't need to go through this conditioning, but at the same time, the procedure itself may be risky. We are trying to target type 3 Gaucher disease. So obviously, but even in type 3, you want to treat those patients that are at great risk rather than those who do pretty well in existing treatments. Then there are other companies, whether they develop SRTs, chaperones, etc. So the fact that we now have several choices, whether we talk about commercially available therapy or whether we talk about treatment in development, just a minute, or whether we talk about treatment that are now being tested, you need guidance. So it's important you mention centers of expertise. You want a center of expertise to be able to balance the risk-benefit situation for any therapeutic modality, and you need the patient collaboration and support, and you only get it when they are involved, as has been said before, from the beginning. So I think the fact today we are still in a stage where we don't have any registered treatment for neuronopathic Gaucher disease, and Professor CHEEMA can tell us that this may be the majority of the patient in Asian countries. So there is no treatment for them, but there is treatment for the visceral manifestation. In type 1 Gaucher, you want to do better, or you want to provide treatment in countries when it's not available. So despite the fact that we are 30 years since the first proof of concept with enzyme replacement therapy came to our world, we are still coping with many challenges. And to do it right, we really need the collaboration of the centers and the patient advocacy group and the pharmaceutical industry. But keep in mind that the pharmaceutical industry at some times may be too motivated and make sure that everything is well balanced to the best interest of the patient.
Great.
Sorry for a lengthy answer, but it is complex.
Very complex. Yeah, it's very complex. Yeah. So let's move on. If you don't have to add anything else, if you want, we can move to the next topic. Yeah. So the next topic is about the collaboration in the clinical management guidelines. Okay, so the therapeutic goals of the treatment for Gaucher disease is based in these parameters to reduce the hepatomegaly, to improve the splenomegaly, about the skeletal pathology, the anemia, thrombocytopenia, the growth in case that, for example, pediatric population, to the pulmonary involvement in case this is affected, and as well to the functional health and well-being of the patients. Okay, so my first question is from this last aspect of the therapeutic goal as well, and my next question is to the patient organization. So is here anything missing that you consider that it affects or reflects a little really the real needs of the patients?
I'll start, I guess. I think that it's great to have markers and clinical guidelines. They're obviously necessary, and to have metrics to measure against is extremely important. Although there's some issues with patients that can't be measured on metrics, and a lot of that has to do with surrounding fatigue and ongoing bone pain. And so all of your numbers can look good, they can be within the correct management, and they'll be perfect, but you still have patients that have ongoing issues that aren't necessarily captured with these metrics. And so I think having good outcome, patient-reported outcomes and good measurements to try and capture some of these other types of these metrics that are ongoing, and that's really why patients are constantly, even though on the current treatments available, on the ERTs and the SRTs that are currently approved, patients are doing great with their metrics, and but they're still, why, the question is, why are patients looking for new treatments? And that's because maybe they're not perfect. Maybe there's something that can be improved upon, and although the clinical guidelines might not show that, the numbers might be right. Obviously, there's something still going on if patients are still looking for something different.
How about your opinion, Tanya?
Yeah.
About this?
So just obviously adding to what AVIVA has said, she talked about patient-reported outcomes, and I think that we know that as part of many clinical management, patients are asked about their sort of quality of life, but they tend to be more general and not pick up the specific issues related to Gaucher's disease. So I think patient-reported outcomes that are specifically developed for the Gaucher community are very important. And as Ari said, after 30 years of treatment and new treatments coming on board, I think this is an area that we as patient advocates are very aware is still missing. And also the fact that when you today are communicating with regulators, patient-reported outcomes are something that they are very interested in. And obviously we're pleased that the development of patient-reported outcomes for both GV1 patients and neuronopathic patients are in the pipeline and being developed. And I think that will definitely be welcomed by our community. And it's something that the IGA are very keen in promoting as part of any sort of clinical management program. Just the only thing I would say about clinical guidelines is that we need to make sure that our clinical guidelines are also accessible wherever you live in the world, and that just because you live in, you're a patient and you're born in Kenya, there needs to be clinical guidelines that all doctors can use. And they just need to be mindful about the fact that in many countries there aren't the tests available, or there isn't the treatment available, but that doesn't mean that you can't still clinically manage a patient very well.
Thank you. Professor Ari ZIMRAN, my question is, do you think that, for example, when we are talking about the quality of life or the functional health, the scores that we are using, for example, normally is used, for example, the SF36 or whatever, this is well adapted to the real needs of Gaucher patients? Do you think that we have to develop another scores and other tools to manage and to evaluate this field?
Yes, Jordi. I think Tanya mentioned the patient-reported outcome, PRO, and we talk today about disease-specific patient-reported outcome. And the scoring system by itself does not help a lot, as when it is very, very broad and general. We have used the severity scores, whether it's the SSI or the new one, mainly for research purposes. But I think for daily life of the patient, you really want to extract that scores that are derived from the things that really matters for the patient. Functionality, fatigue, concern about the future, and things like that. They are all now being developed actually as we speak. I want to make only one short question, a comment about the therapeutic goals. There was a set of therapeutic goals that was presented in 2004 that was not optimal. It was not a real goal. It was merely what you can expect based on one disease registry. But in reality, what we really want to do, we want to normalize. And this is the art of medicine, of course, you want to treat the patient before they develop irreversible complications, before they suffer from bone fractures and pain and osteoporosis. And we don't want them to start when there is a severe growth retardation. This is a huge challenge. But if we can improve the time of diagnosis, prevent the delay, and I personally, I changed my original opinion about newborn screening, for example. But we really need to make a huge effort to diagnose early before the development of irreversible complication, to treat those patients that need to be treated and just follow those that are supposed to be milder, where the role of biomarkers is there. And if we achieve that stage, I'm pretty sure that we will be less confused by various scores and quality of life scores, because when the treatment can prevent the suffering of any symptoms, we will be in an ideal world. I know that Tanya talks about Africa, so you cannot, by the way, I'm not sure that the African countries cannot benefit from biomarkers. I mean, your company is dealing with dry blood spots that you just need to put 5 drops of blood and mail it. And if there are local problems of logistics, they need to be sorted out. I don't believe that there is a different set of guidelines for patients in well-developed countries and less well-developed countries. We really need to make a global effort to do the diagnosis early and to provide therapy that will prevent those irreversible and devastating disease features.
Thank you. Professor CHEEMA, from the pediatric perspective, do you think that there is something missing about how to evaluate the patients, pediatric patients? It is well developed, the guidelines, it's adapted to the real needs of the children. Maybe we have some missing tools regarding the evolution of neuropathic involvement. What is your opinion about that?
For us, looking at these various therapeutic outcomes or the tools, there's so many, with some modified, some previous ones. A lot of them for us regarding the liver volume, spleen, CBCs and thrombocytopenias works, but our population is with the early and severe presentation. And then what Professor ZIMRAN said is really valid, that when do we see them? When do we see them and when do we start treatment affects ultimately a lot of the quality of life. Nowadays, we are fortunate that we can monitor the lyso-Gb1 levels, the biomarkers, and look at it from a biochemical level and say, is the patient doing well? Well, a lot of our patients, because they are the neuronopathic Gaucher disease, such validation from these functional outcomes may not completely reflect on the patient's quality of life. We do still have patients who will come. For instance, we give them time that the liver volume gets better, the spleen volume gets better, the platelets come up, the hemoglobin gets better. They're without transfusion. But then a lot of them, the lyso-Gb levels, as they slowly come down, they do have improvement in some, but the neurological aspects of it, or the pulmonary complications which are there, a lot of emphasis in these is given to things which are in typical of GD1, but lesser emphasis is on, we don't see a lot of severe bone disease. We have the younger group of patients, and our follow-up is not that long for them right now. We have a very small chunk of older patients who are in their teenagers. I have yet to see a pregnant Gaucher disease mom. So a lot of them are not on therapy. They're sans therapy. So you're seeing the very bad effects over there. And then on therapy are the ones, very few are the ones which are on therapy at the right time. We have patients coming on therapy when their lyso-Gb levels are rocketing, their organ sizes are massive, their platelet counts are low. So yes, when their families, we see them and we say, how are they doing? The mom turns around and looks at me and says, are you satisfied with the blood test? Because I only noticed that his appetite is better and he's gained a little weight, but he's not, he's playing a little better, but he's not. So after 6 months, even then so the quality of life improvement is going to take time. A lot of these patients who come with a visceral burden of disease have very high markers in the blood, their platelets are down, the growth parameters and their nutritional status stays down for quite some time. How do we define that? In what context? How long is it going to take in a 3-year-old who had massive organomegaly? And is he going to get better in 1 year? No, he doesn't get better in 1 year, even with therapy. His general well-being and appetite and a little bit, and on the parameters of liver and spleen, he might be better. But on the neurological front of whether it's or pulmonary front, many times you're not getting the outcome measures as much as we are really relying a lot on the simple things of anemia and splenomegaly and hepatomegaly. Growth normalization, even with therapy, if it is delayed, it takes a long, I have yet to see a perfect catch-up growth in my Gaucher disease patients, despite their CBCs, otherwise their lyso-Gb levels getting better. So I would say, I don't know how to put it, but it's like our population seems to be different, that there's no perfect validations. There's no proper guideline in these senses of what exactly, apart from the hematological parameters, how do we assess the functional health and well-being of these children? Growth parameters and nutrition, again, these are things that we need to work on, and particularly the growth parameters of children whose therapy was started later. In the West, if you get diagnosis, you're going to get your treatment. Here, we're going to apply. Some will get a treatment, some won't. But those who do get treatment are not likely to get treatment before they have at least been unwell for some years, or at least in the same family, at least 8-9 months or a year. So that's where otherwise the main issue is on, as we go and we follow them up, then only we can have anticipatory complications. For instance, are we talking enough about what is happening in the liver? We have, even though ours is the GD3 population, some of them we are seeing a lot of fibrosis in the liver, which I cannot explain sometimes. And then obviously we are having the lymph nodes in some patients and the lymphadenopathies, which is more in a small group of patients as compared to others. And they have this relentlessly and they go on and it shows no improvement. We have the protein losing enteropathy in some of them, which fluctuates, sometimes bad, despite being on enzyme therapy. The liver fibrosis, the Gaucheromas, the neurological impact on some of them. But we have also seen that if, for instance, in some of them who have the neuronopathic Gaucher, when the sibling is detected early, and we started the ERT pretty early in 2 of them, it's only 2 that we could actually start earlier on. then the sibling which had the neurological kind of things at a particular age, the elder sibling, the younger one who had got therapy earlier did not really show the same symptoms at the same age. But then again, there is so much heterogeneity even among siblings that it's difficult to say, is it from the early onset of therapy that they're better, or it's that they are different from the sibling anyway? Because two siblings, even with the same mutation, we have seen don't behave in the same way. One of them will be doing well on ERT, the other one will be having pulmonary complications or will be having other complications. So, and the long term, I can't talk about because I don't have enough data to talk about anticipatory of complications, whether they have other complications in GD1, whether they're going to have neurological other complications, they're going to have hematological disorders. Have you seen any? Liver disturbs me in a lot of them because we have, and then we have started doing the liver elastograms, because basically looking at the fibrosis scoring of the liver, we were surprised that many of them have liver fibrosis, which is beyond what we would expect from their mutation. So I don't know what are the thoughts of Professor ZIMRAN on those, about the liver involvement in these patients. And mine is a very young population and is showing liver fibrosis.
Yeah. Okay, so we have only 10 minutes, so let's move on to the next topic because, yeah. So sorry, because it's the time. Yeah, it's about the next topic. It's about the collaboration with the awareness of Gaucher disease. So this is enough awareness of Gaucher disease because we have an interval, significant interval of the delay of the diagnosis, even now, even currently. So maybe not, is not enough the awareness that we have or the knowledge that we have about Gaucher disease, even if it's known that in one of the studies, only 20% of the hematological and oncology physicians included the Gaucher disease in the differential diagnosis when they had a very typical Gaucher patient. So something happened. So if because we have a very short time, I would like your opinion, okay? But only 3 minutes, 4 minutes maximum, okay? Yeah. Let's start with AVIVA, for example, and we have keep the same order. Yeah.
So raising awareness, I think now about Gaucher disease is very different than it was 10 and 20 years ago. In the US, we have about half of our states have newborn screening. And so we're catching diagnoses, within a couple days of birth of a disease that often might not have presented itself for 10, 15 years later. So you have many families that are reaching out to the patient organization, new parents that have never heard of this thing, and all of a sudden their child is diagnosed with it and they're very scared. In addition, with the onset of electronic health records, that has completely changed diagnoses here in the United States. And you have physicians that might type in a couple different symptoms, and Google is going to pop up Gaucher disease. And so it's really, I think that for myself, I wasn't diagnosed for 27 years. My son, we knew before he was born. And, I think that those types of diagnoses in the US, where you're not being diagnosed till your 20s or 30s, but presenting with symptoms, I think those are going to ultimately go away because of the, electronic health records and Google and newborn screening. So I think for patient organizations, our job is to then point these newly diagnosed families to centers of excellence. And, making sure that they know that there's places they can go that have expertise in this area, and they get the information that they need to make the choices that are right for their families. So I believe that, we get contacted, I would say weekly, with a newborn screening diagnoses, and from somewhere, outside of an urban area. And again, we give them the list of providers that can provide them with the most complete expertise picture for their ongoing treatment.
Thank you. Tanya, what is your opinion?
To add to what AVIVA has already said, One of the things that you said at the very beginning, JORDI, was about hematologists. And I think that we know that hematologists are involved in a lot of potential patient diagnosis pathways. So I think one of our roles is to encourage organisations like the European Hematology Association and the American Hematology Association, and spreading out to other areas of the world, is to make sure that there is Gaucher's disease is actually in the curriculum, and that when they have their annual programs, that there are dedicated sessions. And I'm pleased to say that actually the European Hematology Association has now actually included Gaucher's disease in their curriculum. So their members will actually have to have an exam on Gaucher's disease. And I think that they're very keen to involve the patient community in that, to also listen to feedback from the community on what their diagnostic journey was like, to understand how they can better diagnose patients. And I would also add, with technology and more people using the internet, I think that there is a lot more work going on in terms of like diagnostic platforms with calculators about weighting different symptoms. And I think that's also something the patient community can have an input on, to inform people when they're developing these tools, what their symptoms were, so that they can help that diagnostic journey.
Thank you. Professor CHEEMA?
Yeah, well, I would say we are not there right now for the a good awareness, but I would consider it is hugely improved from where we were before 2013. We did multiple surveys. We did one in 2006 in main cities and in hospitals. And then we did another one in 2015. We haven't done one recently. But still, we would say we're not where we should be. We have a lot of patients who are still misdiagnosed, because we have the patients who are younger and they have big organs. A lot of them get treatments for malaria, and some of them have even been treated as a query leishmania, despite the fact that the bone marrow showed somebody did a bone marrow and they queried storage cells, but the patient got a leishmania treatment. But malaria and even disseminated TB is considered before a storage disease. But this used to be way more before 2010 or 13. The awareness is better, but because the organs are much bigger, and so I would say our population is younger, but the average lag is still there. We get patients who are pretty moribund sometimes, with a platelet count of 17,000 and a spleen which is huge and stunted, and lyso-Gb levels are really, really high. So, but this for Pakistan is still better after 10 years of having awareness workshops in all the cities. So we went to every major city and had workshops and awareness, and we did preceptorship courses for doctors who are interested in it. That has made a huge impact. So I think if we focus on awareness in all countries it's needed, particularly in Pakistan, it does help. And so we tend to get patients a little faster sometimes now than it was in let's say 2006, when we would really get them when they were almost, they were near to dying, and we used to have patients dying out of bleeding from thrombocytopenia and the bleeding tendency, or literally they would have had 2 children who were dead without a diagnosis. So now that's better, but still needs a lot of more awareness, I would say.
Professor ZIMRAN, very briefly, your opinion?
I must tell you that one of the reasons that you see improvement in Pakistan is because of Professor CHEEMA. So she's like the only one that campaigned so much for the awareness of not just Gaucher, but other metabolic diseases, that this is unique. Yeah. But with every effort that she makes things a little better. But you cannot expect in Pakistan that combines the fact, first of all, Gaucher is ultra rare there. I don't know if the prevalence is 1 to 50,000 or 1 to 100 or more than 1 to 100,000. I think that the challenge in countries like Pakistan, India, and Africa will always be greater than in the other countries. But let's talk about Israel. In Ashkenazi Jews, it's not even, Gaucher is not even a rare disease. By definition, 1 out of 800 or 150 people is affected. We have more patients with Gaucher than with lymphoma, for example. But still, no matter what we do, with seminars, with media, with stories, with grand rounds, in my own hospital, we keep seeing patients that have been misdiagnosed. Just 3 weeks ago, I saw a patient who bled in her second delivery, and she had low platelet count, Ashkenazi Jew, a little bit of a splenomegaly, and still it took her time for diagnosis. So I am not very optimistic like the others with all the greatness about media. I think at the end of the day, it will be technology. And I think CENTOGENE basically exemplifies the potential. I think the changes in the world of rare diseases will come through technology, whether it's newborn screening or even better prenatal testing. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Thank you to all of the panel members. It was truly a fruitful discussion, and I am looking forward to keeping working together. Thanks to everyone who has tuned in. We hope that you have walked away with a better understanding of Gaucher and actionable steps on how you can also play an important role within this community. There is still exciting things to come. And I would like to pass the word to my colleague Ben, who will share latest updates about the art contest.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Hi, everybody. Look, my name is Ben. I'm the Director of Communications here at CENTOGENE, and I have the utter privilege of being able to talk about one of my favorite topics today, which was the art contest, the hashtag We Are Gaucher art contest that we've been hosting. Now, it has been a fantastic response, first and foremost. It has been absolutely overwhelming seeing how the Gaucher community and supporters of the Gaucher community have come together to show us your vision, your artistic talent, your creativity, what's important to you. It's really been quite overwhelming. So overwhelming, in fact, that we don't want it to stop. So we've made a decision, and we're going to actually extend it. We're going to keep receiving entries until the 30th of October. So we're going to carry on our awareness campaign for Gaucher Awareness Month. And the fantastic thing is it means that this is still up for grabs. This fantastic Beat Studio 3 wireless pair of headphones in beautiful red, some CENTOGENE red. And that's not all. It's also up for grabs for a 1-year subscription to music subscription service, either iTunes or Spotify, whatever flavor you like there. So we're going to then announce the winner of these wonderful prizes, the headphones and the subscription, on the 31st of October. We'll be releasing the announcement on our social media. So you've still got 1 more month to put your submissions in. So we want you to be as creative as you want. You go to the Gaucher Day website, and you can actually enter it. You can upload it there. It's very, very easy, and just be as creative as you want. It's really been amazing seeing the wide range of what people have been sending us. And of course, don't forget to vote. So this is completely based on the voting of the community. So you can go onto the website, you can have a look at all of the entrants, and you can click on the one you like, and the one that receives the most votes by the end of that period will be the lucky winner of that. So don't forget to vote and come on in. So look, it's been fantastic having everybody online with us today. A little bit different in COVID times, but really, really appreciate everybody coming together and supporting us for Gaucher Awareness Day. So look, fantastic. Can't wait to see everything that you've got coming through. And thank you, Jordi. Passing back over to you.
Thank you, Ben. Just a few words to bring the end to the events for the International Gaucher Day 2020. We had 8 webinars and just finished a very interesting panel discussion. I'm sure that we have improved the understanding of the disease, raising awareness and getting some more ideas to working together for improving the healthcare of patients with Gaucher disease. Once again, thank you for joining and have a nice International Gaucher Day. Bye.